Hello, welcome to The Conversation and News Central Television. This is the program where we bring you up to speed with all the political happenings on the African continent. I am Gbenga Aborowa.
And I am Rita Omodia. Lots of stories trending on the political scene. And while Nigeria gears up for 2023, we're seeing situations in Angola where the daughter of the former president of Angola, Isabella dos Santos, was seen arrested. I mean, that made quite headlines.
Yes, Forbes used to call her the richest woman in Africa. She said, you know, these accusations have political undertones to it, and she was ready to, back in the past, she would say she's ready to answer questions. But now a notice has been put by Interpol. She's wanted. So it'd be nice to see how that pans out.
Definitely. Yes. I really want to see how that pans out, especially in the fight against corruption. But right now, we switch gears to situations for today, where we're talking about the outrage in South Africa over the ruling on the release of anti-apartheid hero Chris Hani's killer, Janusz Walus. Who knew that less than 48 hours, some inmates in the prison where he's being held will take justice into their own hands by stabbing him? We'll be looking at all the circumstances leading to this development on The Conversation today.
Also, we will be turning our attention to Nigeria, where amid growing calls for the ruling party's presidential candidate, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, to honor presidential debates, his camp has given a condition, saying without his contender, Peter Obi, revealing their manifesto, he would not be attending any debate. I found this quite hilarious, to say the least, because it's not the only one contesting. And your manifesto, I mean, the conditions are not for him. You want to be president of the whole of Nigeria. So in what world does that, is this excuse even valid?
In my head, I'm even wondering what concerns you with the manifesto of another party. Why not come out, if you're ready to speak to the people, come out, give whatever manifesto you want to give, and, you know, let this all go. Meanwhile, in South Africa, I mean, it's quite thrilling. On Monday, we talked about the situation of Janusz Walus, and who knew? I
mean, and less than 48 hours, because he was meant to be released on Friday, and we have this stabbing incident. So,
you know, Gbenga, one of our guests on Monday actually said, he said, if they actually release him to South Africa, you cannot guarantee safety.
Yes, so we'll get into the details soon and see what happens, especially when it comes to safety and the political implications of his release. Now, the killer of the South African anti-apartheid leader, Chris Hani, has been stabbed in prison days after the country's top court ordered him to be released on parole. In a statement, the Department of Correctional Services confirmed the incident, which it described as unfortunate. It is alleged that Walus was stabbed by another inmate from the same housing unit. 69-year-old Walus, who has spent nearly 3 decades in jail for the 1993 killing, had been due to be released by Thursday under last week's order by the Constitutional Court.
The ruling sparked protests in South Africa, with demonstrators kicking against Walus's release. Walus stabbing is not the only violent reaction that has been recorded after the judgment was delivered. Over the weekend, the gravesite and memorial of the late anti-apartheid hero Chris Hani in a suburb east of Johannesburg were also vandalized. Meanwhile, the prison service has confirmed that Walus is stable and receiving necessary health care while investigations are underway. Now, joining us to discuss all of this, we have Saul Molobi, business publisher and author, Deconstructing Brand Africa, joining us from Johannesburg, South Africa. We also have Dr. Ntsikelelo Breakfast, a political analyst, Department of History and Political Studies, Nelson Mandela University, also all the way from South Africa. Gentlemen, welcome to The Conversation.
Thank you very much for
good evening, and good evening to all your viewers.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So I'll begin with Dr. Breakfast. I mean, take us through, what can you tell us about this incident that happened yesterday afternoon involving an inmate and Janusz Walus?
Well, first of all, I do understand why there has been an outrage. I think that is largely because Chris Hani was one of the most popular politicians, you know, in the early 90s after former President Mandela. And arguably, he could have been the president after Nelson Mandela. I mean, I presume that you remember what had happened in 1991 at the ANC conference after the unbanning of the ANC, when there was a stalemate between former President Mbeki and also the late Chris Hani. So he was very much popular, in particular to the left of the political spectrum. So some people have not let go of resentment, or they have not let go of the grudge that they still hold towards those who might have been involved in the death of Chris Hani. The argument has always been that, you know, in the early 90s, what had happened was the fall of the Soviet Union. And that was an internationally coordinated effort. So even the death of Chris Hani has always been seen along those lines, that there was an international footprint, meaning that Janusz Walus has not opened up about what had happened, who were the players who were involved. So people are saying that you can't then release a person like that who has not shown to be remorseful. No wonder he has been stabbed in prison. But the concern that I have has been the aspersions that have been cast by those who were close to Chris Hani. I understand that people are still having broken hearts, you know, they lost their loved one, blah, blah, blah. But I think we must be careful of creating a new culture whereby we pose a threat to our judiciary, because we need to maintain the notion of a separation of powers. Otherwise, our democracy will be in danger.
Thank you very much. I'd like to bring in Saul Molobi. Now, Saul, what do we know about the current status of Janusz Walus? And Dr. Breakfast just mentioned the remorsefulness of Janusz Walus. He says he's not repentant. And for years, the South African Communist Party has been talking about remorse for Walus, that he has not been transparent about the events that played out in 1993, and he hasn't mentioned his collaborators. That's why the Truth and Reconciliation Council under Archbishop Desmond Tutu did not grant him amnesty. So what's the current health status of Janusz Walus, and what do you make of all of this? The South African Communist Party says he's not remorseful, therefore he should not be released, and he has not atoned for his sins.
Yeah, thank you very much. The statement released by our Department of Correctional Services indicates that he is stable, he's been taken care of. But I think we shouldn't also forget the fact that he is held at a maximum facility, security facility, and as such, he is in the house with hardened criminals just like him. But I think I'll take a step back to say that post-1994, we established the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that basically said the liberation forces and the apartheid supporting forces were to appear before the TRC, where they will disclose all the atrocities they have committed. But they also needed to tell the whole truth. And their victims were also brought into the loop, into the equation, and then there was facilitation between both parties to find finality. And in fact, later on, many people who disclosed everything, who spoke the truth, who showed that they were remorseful and they were ready to reconcile, were then given amnesty. But unfortunately with Walus, he never showed any remorse up until today, because the reports we have received was that he said he was sorry that he killed Chris Hani, the father and the husband, but he wasn't sorry that he killed a communist. So for us, this means that he's not ready to accept the path that we charted through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. But having said that, we also need to take into consideration that South Africa is a constitutional democracy. As my colleague over there was saying, that we need to respect, one, the rule of law, and respecting the rule of law also means recognizing that we have separation of powers. The executive, different from the legislature, different from the judiciary. And Brand South Africa goes all over the world, basically saying to potential investors that we have a very strong independent judiciary. In such a way that if you were having problems with our government, you could always take a recourse by going to the courts, and the courts will rule in your favor if indeed your rights were trampled upon. So we need to look at that. And also, as South Africa, we also have the fourth estate, a free and independent media that reports on all the shenanigans that may be going against the constitutional spirit that we all embraced since 1994. So in this instance, yes, there was a march today by the Tripartite Alliance, but we also need to divorce them from the state, even though the Tripartite Alliance is a ruling alliance in South Africa. They marched in their capacity as political parties, not necessarily as the South African state. So we need to bring that delineation between the two roles they were playing today.
All right. Thank you so much, Saul. I want to bring in Dr. Breakfast into this. And you talk about remorse and the apology of Janusz Walus. Now, Janusz Walus has been in prison for about 29 years. And we're seeing that after the order for his release, we saw also violent protests and the attack of Chris Hanne's gravesite. Now, Saul mentioned the fact that South Africa is still a very much communist party. What's the situation of things in South Africa? The people, what's the reaction? And why do we have attacks on the gravesite of Chris Hanne? I would have expected the other way around. Can you help us explain all this?
Are you talking to me?
Yes, please, Dr. Breakfast.
Yeah, so the vandalism that we have seen at the cemetery with regard to the grave of the late Chris Hanne is very symbolic. I think it's an expression of discontentment. It's an expression of unhappiness. I think some people are trying to convey a message that the way things are is not the way things should be. And also they're trying to take a political stand. But at the same time, I'm not sure if that is a way of addressing an issue of this nature, because if this is spearheaded by a political party like the Communist Party, which has an alliance with the ruling party, it can really escalate a conflict that can be out of hand. But at the same time, I don't think that other people outside the ANC can join forces with those who are unhappy about the way things are and add fuel into the fire.
Now, what has the South African police and the correctional services done about the situation? I mean, on the other hand, we had Walus being stabbed in the correctional services and situations in South Africa. What has the South African police done to address the situation?
No, I don't think that the unhappiness has really permeated throughout the length and the breadth of the country. I think the situation is under control. I think Janusz Walus has been admitted to a hospital. So I don't think that the country is in a mess or there is a conflict. It's just that there are signs that if this thing is not addressed, it can escalate into a conflict. But I think so far, I think the police and other law enforcement agencies are dealing with this accordingly.
Thank you, Dr. Breakfast. I'd like to bring on Saul from Johannesburg. Now, Saul, are you surprised this is happening now? He's been in, Janusz Walus has been in prison for over 29 years with no reported assassination attempt in his life. So do you think this has to do with this imminent release? And as the South African police or correctional services said anything about the attacker, his identity or the motives? What do we know?
Yeah, they haven't mentioned the perpetrators. I take it that the investigations are still continuing. But like I mentioned, we are talking about hardened criminals who are kept at a maximum security facility. So I think once the investigations are concluded, they should be able to communicate to the country and the entire world to say what really happened and who was the perpetrator. But let me also emphasize the fact that South Africans will never go on the rampage in protest, violent rampage in protest against the parole given to Janusz. We should remember on the day that Janusz killed Chris Hani, Mandela showed his leadership skills, and he called on all of us to maintain moral superiority over the apartheid regime and those elements from the right who wanted to derail the process that the country was embarking upon towards its democratization. And indeed, many people then thought that the country was going to be plunged into a violent crisis, and Mandela's words prevailed and peace was maintained throughout the country. So I don't see any reason now that 29 years later, when they are releasing him, then we will betray the instruction that Mandela gave us immediately after Chris Hani's assassination. So far, yes, people are angry, people are in disgust, but at the same time, people also know that they have to respect the rule of law. They have to respect the judiciary and its independence. And they also have to respect the fact that the Constitutional Court is the apex court in this country. So there's no other court which is above it. And its mandate is to protect the Constitution as adopted by our parliament in 1996. So I don't foresee any violence erupting across the country. Yes, Chris Hani's family responded the way they did, but one may understand their emotional state at this stage. The reality is that Universal Human Rights Charter basically says that once you have served 25 years of your life sentence, you qualify for parole, even though, yes, there are conditions that one has to meet. And we are happy that Janusz won't be released and deported to Poland, where some right-wingers are seeing him as a hero. He will serve the remainder of his sentence here at home. That's why special mechanisms were put in place for him to be given a permanent resident status in South Africa so that he can serve his sentence. We should also remember that serving your sentence at home under conditions prescribed by the Correctional Services and the Justice Ministry means that you are not really free because you are still subjected to all those conditions. So he will continue serving his sentence here at home.
Okay, and I'll still talk about that sentence now, and I want to bring Dr. Breakfast into this now, because he's saying, Saul is saying that he will serve a sentence at home. But we also heard that Poland has said that they will not enforce Walus's parole conditions in his country, as the SH Constitution has no jurisdiction there. Now, the Department of Home Affairs said he must serve his parole in South Africa. Now, Saul has told us that despite the fact that there is anger in the land, it will not cause so much rampage. But has he not become a parole of great risk? And what kind of heightened level of security details will he have if he stays back in South Africa and if he's eventually released?
Yeah, so I do agree with my colleague that if we did overcome security threats in the early 90s that were posing danger to our society, surely we can also overcome this one. Because in the early 90s, as you might know, I mean, we were on the verge of having a civil war. But as my colleague indicated, the late President Mandela managed to cool off the emotions of people. So I think this is not something that is insurmountable. I think we can overcome this. And I think the people who are holding strong views about this with regard to the release of Janusz Walus are people who are aligned to the ANC, not all and sundry.
Sorry, Dr. Breakfast, we seem to be having connection issues with you, but that's
I have no reason to believe that there are no security plans in place to prevent a conflict that can escalate and pose a danger to the stability of the country. The inmate that is alleged to have stabbed Janusz Walus, I'm told that he was a former MK soldier, so no wonder maybe he might have committed the act that he did, because maybe he still holds a grudge. But I'm not sure about other security threats outside prison to Janusz Walus.
Well, I'd like to follow up with Saul on that. I mean, from observers everywhere, you definitely know that Janusz Walus is what you can term dead man walking, is an open target. So is the South African state obliged to provide a level of security for him? And wouldn't that be counterproductive, because it's going to cost taxpayers more money to provide that level of security for him for the rest of his life? Is it not just better to let him go to Poland?
Yeah, first of all, we need to bear in mind that our democracy rose to prominence as a negotiated settlement.
Yes.
I presume that you might know that this guy also has been earning a salary, despite the fact that he committed the political sin that he did. You know, so there have been a lot of deals that have been struck behind closed doors in order to usher us into the kind of political setup that we have in the country. The second point that I want to make is the culture of human rights, and that is provided in our constitution. So it doesn't mean that because you might have committed something like what he did, therefore your human rights, they cease to exist. So I have no reason to believe that the state would deny him the right to be protected, because that is a constitutional matter.
Okay, now I'll bring Saul into this now. We know that the South African Communist Party wrote a letter to the Ministry of Justice protesting the parole granted to Janusz Walus and even asked for a delay. Do we have any update on that? Because we have different parties appealing to these order that's been given for the release of Janusz Walus. What's the update on that?
Yeah, the South African Communist Party is in alliance with the ANC, which is a ruling party. The South African Communist Party isn't a ruling party. But also moving from there, our constitution guarantees everyone the right to a peaceful protest. So the South African Communist Party is within its right to stage protest marches. The Labour Federation, COSATU, is also within its right to stage protest action. The ANC as a political party, not as a ruling party, also has the right, not as part of the state, also has the right to protest. But the reality is that all of us will respect the judgment as meted out by the apex court in the country. We shouldn't also forget that there are many other racists who committed atrocities previously that we have pardoned. There was Baron Straydom, who went berserk in Pretoria and killed many people. He was released. Then there was the Flag Plus commander who killed many comrades and anti-apartheid activists in general. and he served time and he was released 2 years ago. But also, let's not forget that a prisoner remains a responsibility of the state. So if you are released on parole, you still remain the responsibility of the state. So for that reason, the state will continue ensuring that the prisoner who released on parole adheres to the conditions set down by the Correctional Services Department, but they'll also ensure that that prisoner is safe like any other citizen in this country. So for that reason, I would say that once Walus is released, the state will make sure that he stays safe. But at the same time, he has to conform to the conditions of his parole.
Thank you very much, Saul Molobi, business publisher and author of Deconstructing Brand Africa. We do appreciate your time on today's conversation. I'd like to say thank you to Dr. Ntsikelelo Breakfast, political analyst, Department of History and Political Studies at the Nelson Mandela University in South Africa. We do appreciate your insights and contributions to the program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.